Since October of 2023, people have been really fixated on glitch productions, more specifically the Amazing Digital Circus, known for its vibrant colors and unique character designs. So I thought, with episode 9 just releasing, what better way to honor the show than by redesigning the characters? So let's not waste any time.
Let's get right into the show!
I figure there's no one better to start with than Pomni. First and foremost, I decided to give her more human anatomy, sort of like that Fortnite model that just released. I kind of like the idea of, instead of Pomni just being this white blank slate character with jester clothes, that she would look more like a marionette doll, which is a lot more similar to the designs of NPCs that Caine normally does, so I thought that sort of fit the theme. And in typical jester fashion, I decided to give her a ruffly collar and cuffs on her sleeves. My main goal with most of these designs was to create a conversation of asymmetry, so you'll notice with most of them that they have patterns but only on one side, or alternating patterns like on her skirt, which I decided to do in lines instead of the checkered pattern to contrast her hat. I didn't do anything interesting for her legs, just using it as another chance to show off her doll joints. And then I just gave her some folded over socks and color block clown shoes, as I wrote it in my notes. I'm really showing off my roots as a Sonic fan with those shoes. In typical Pomni fashion, I left her alternating red and blue color palette, as well as her yellow, or in this case yellow and gold, accents. I also decided to color her hair brown instead of black, mostly just because I like it better. And with that, I've reached the end of my notes, so just enjoy watching me render this design and then I'll be back at the end. After some adjustments to her proportions, this is how she turned out. For Ragatha, I started off by giving her a really flowy, pear-shaped dress. I also decided to give her very big legs and feet, and actual shoes, unlike her normal design, which just has those stubs. I was inspired by two actual ragdolls I have, because I find their proportions very fun, and their designs very appealing. While drawing her hair, I got the idea to make it tied up instead to give her design a little bit more variety, which I thought was a really cute look, so I decided to keep it. While I was working on this, my brother said that she sort of looks like she would work in a 50s diner, so I thought adding an apron would definitely bring that together. I ended up giving her a sort of droopy-eyed expression, which I think makes her look a little more sisterly, like she's perpetually a little bit worried about the others. I also got the idea to give her stitched limbs so she looked more like an actual doll, and I thought by giving certain patches different colors, it would make it look like she actually had to stitch herself up, since Ragatha always seems to get beat up during their adventures. With her dress itself, I decided to make her darker blue patches have patterns on them, because like I said before, I'm all about patterns with these designs, and I decided to make the bottom of the dress more faded, so she looks like she's been there a long time. Because I think it's a sort of interesting concept to be able to see how long she's been there on her actual design. Even though she's still always looking out for the others, you can see how her time in the circus is wearing her down a little bit. I also gave her the same sock design that Pomni has, because I thought it would be cute if they matched. And after erasing a little bit of her hair to give her a clearer silhouette, Ragatha was done. Gangle has an all-around pretty simple design, which is what makes it so hard to redesign her. What I started with in my redesign was by changing her mask shape to look more like Bendy from Bendy and the Ink Machine. That was honestly just me misremembering what actual Gangle looks like and thinking that her mask was always bent that way. I also ended up giving her much bigger legs, and those two things ended up being the most cohesive part of her design, so I made a much simpler sort of stickman version, and then decided to rework it from there. For her tears, I couldn't decide between a sort of stereotypical anime crying look or something more ornamental, so I ended up just doing both, which I was a really big fan of because it creates, say it with me, asymmetry. Speaking of asymmetry, you can see how on different parts of her body the ribbons bend and turn backwards. I decided to differentiate the two sides by putting a pattern on the back. Another idea that I had with Gangle was to give her a tail sort of situation, using the dangly parts of the bow on her legs. But then I realized that her legs sort of fill the role of those dangly parts, so I decided not to go through with it. Going into Redesigning Kinger, I already had a few ideas in mind. I wanted him to have much broader shoulders, if you can call it that considering he's a chess piece, and I wanted him to have a very fluffy robe. I started off by just drawing a king chess piece using reference, and then drew him again with a better pose and posture. I also decided to draw him with only one hand because I like the idea that he can just spawn them in and despawn them whenever it's necessary, sort of like how the Mii characters would work on Wii games. While doing research for Kinger's outfit, I learned that his style of robe is apparently called a royal mantle robe, and the fluffy white part with black spots is apparently called ermine is apparently called ermine fabric. So, using this new information as inspiration, I decided to make the style of his robe a little fancier. I also made the black speckled parts into hearts because I thought it was cute. I also made sure that while I was coloring him in, to add a more wooden texture to his head, because honestly, I was surprised that he didn't already look like that in the original show. The last details I added were lines on his gloves reminiscent of Mickey Mouse, and a crown on top of his head, which I didn't add until the very end, with a spade-shaped gem in the middle. My brother had the good idea to incorporate card suits into Kinger and Queenie's designs. On Kinger, you'll see hearts and a spade, and on a potential Queenie design, I would include diamonds and a club. And if you are interested in seeing a part 2 where I include Queenie, make sure you let me know in the comments below. After lining up Kinger with the rest of the designs, I realized that his proportions were a little bit off, but after making those adjustments and adding his crown, he ended up looking like this. The very first thing I added to Jax's design was making his ears much bigger and floppier. I'm just not that big of a fan of the pencil-thin ears he usually has. Another confession about Jax's design is that I've never liked the fact that he is just wearing overalls and nothing else. So in this redesign, I decided to give him a big fluffy sweater. Another thing I wanted to incorporate into this design was giving Jax a sort of bow tie or bow, and I couldn't really decide where I wanted to put it, which ultimately led to me forgetting to add it until after. But I decided to leave it on another layer so I can move it whenever I feel like it. Now is probably a good time to mention that when I was going into these redesigns, the idea I had in mind was that they were based after episode 9, so do with that information what you will. I just want the rabbit to be comfortable in his own skin, damn it. Anyway, back to my rant about asymmetry. That's why I decided to only put stripes on one of the sleeves and also make the patches be different colors and in different spots on his pants. I also realized while working on the rendering for Jax that the blue patch kind of looks like it belongs to Ragatha, so maybe he took it from Ragatha, I don't know. I decided to color his sweater green because green is a complementary color to purple. Where have I seen green and purple together in this series before? Well, no time to ponder on that because Jax's design is done! Yay! One of the only things we know about Zooble's real-world counterpart is that they run a queer alternative bar, so I've always been a little bit surprised that they weren't more partial to using alternative-looking accessories. So in my redesign, I decided to incorporate mostly those, such as the big chunky boot with the spikes on the bottom, a bat wing, a tentacle, just a lot more intimidating accessories. For their eyes, I decided to change their right pupil to look like the shape of a star, which begins the trend of having mostly sharp accessories on their right, and mostly round accessories on their left. The exception to this rule is the accessories on their head, which has a spiky horn on the left, and a round antenna on the right. I also decided to make the symbol on their chest to look like a pop tab from a Caine, which suits Zooble for a few reasons. The obvious one being that they work in a bar, so they'd probably end up working with canned drinks a lot, and the less obvious one being that I've personally met a lot of queer and alternative people who use pop tabs to make jewelry. Majority of their color palette, most notably on their arm, is using the colors from the non-binary flag. I considered having their arm have the colors of the lesbian flag instead, but I thought it was more important to represent their gender rather than their sexuality in this design. As for my reasons to where I put every other color on their design, I didn't really have a rhyme or reason to it, other than the fact that I wanted to make sure that there wasn't too much of one color in one spot, mostly purple, which I still ended up using a lot of regardless. I've noticed when most other people redesign the Digital Circus characters, they tend to not really know what to do with Zooble or leave them out entirely, and after making my own redesigns, I'm not really surprised by this. There isn't much else you can really do with Zooble that doesn't change their design entirely, that isn't just replacing their arms and legs. But despite that, I still think they're one of my best redesigns in this series. The first decision I made with Caine's redesign was to give him very prominent canine teeth, specifically on his top jaw. I also kept the very deliberate choice from his original design to have one eye consistently be bigger than the other one. I also decided to have his tongue be permanent, rather than only appearing when he needs it, even if that makes his design a little bit more unsettling. For his clothes, I was looking at actual showman's jackets for inspiration, and I noticed that a lot of them had vests underneath, so I decided to give him one as well. The clasps holding his jacket closed are in the shape of a sun and moon, as a nod to the ones outside of the circus. I also gave him an extra large bow tie and very obnoxious shoulder pads. After looking at Caine's actual design, I realized that the space behind his bow tie and underneath his head is just flat. There's no collar or anything, so I got the idea that it would just be entirely transparent, almost as if somebody forgot to finish his model. Although that idea doesn't really translate well into a 2D drawing, but just know that the idea was there. I had another idea that I really liked, but I couldn't really translate into his design. Caine has always had heterochromia, but I liked the idea that after he lets go of the blue AI in episode 9, that he would lose his heterochromia and just have permanently green eyes rather than one blue eye. However, I thought his heterochromia was too iconic to get rid of, so I decided not to go through with that idea here. But when I make more fan art and comics with Caine in them in the future, that might be something I incorporate. After making Caine just a little bit taller and adding sparkles to his vest, it was time to move on to Bubble. I only really made a few changes to Bubble, deciding to give him a top hat and bow tie to match Caine, but with reverse colors to Caine's. Caine's being a black hat with a red ribbon and a red bow tie, and Bubble's being a red hat with a black ribbon and bow tie. I also gave Bubble eyelashes as a nod to the fact that when I first watched the pilot, I thought Bubble was a girl. After giving Bubble himself an iridescent shine, as well as adding that same oil spill look to his bow tie and ribbon, he and Caine were both finished. And with that, the entire main cast of the Amazing Digital Circus has been redesigned. Despite their varying shapes and sizes, I think they all look really cute as a group. I tried to keep their color palettes mostly consistent between all of them, for that very reason, but I think the spots where I diverged from that color palette really shine as well, like with Jax's vibrant green sweater or Pomni's dark blue. All in all, I think studying their designs and seeing what I could do different was a really fun project, and I would absolutely be interested in doing a part 2 in the future where I look at the rest of the cast. I appreciate you watching all the way until the end, even if I seemed a little bit nervous or awkward this whole time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll consider joining me again for my next art adventure. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!